And I would like you to please welcome Kelli Benis.
Maya Angelou once said, "There's no greater burden than bearing an untold story inside of you." Many people will say that a small child at the age of 4 couldn't possibly begin to process things like right and wrong, cause and effect, or consequences. Maybe you can think of a time in your life when you were young and you knew that something that had happened to you had been so wrong. I want you to think about how that felt. And more importantly, where did you feel it? For me, I feel it right here. Some people call it intuition, and some people call it gut instinct. But for me, I describe it as my soul spot. It's my own internal powerhouse. It is a spot in me that knows how awesome I am. Often fights with this guy up here, but here I know it, and there's no hiding from that truth there. It's an internal guidepost that shows me what to do next, what direction to take, when to slow down, when to speed up. When I was 4 years old, I was sexually abused by my grandfather, from age 4 till 12 actually. What's important about that is that at age 4, from the very first inappropriate touch, and it wasn't a big one, it was just inappropriate, my soul spot was screaming loud. At that time, nobody used to talk about abuse and, don't let anybody touch you in your bathing suit area. We didn't have those discussions when I was little. And certainly didn't expect it to be related to someone who the family knew and loved as, my grandfather. So when that did happen, my soul was my reference point. It was my guiding light to say that there was something wrong. But as a 4-year-old, I had enough wherewithal to be processing, if I tell my mom, which is what I instinctively wanted to do, I wanted to go into the next room and tell my mom, I knew that she would be so sad. I knew she would be sad. You could tell. I knew that my grandfather, who I loved very, very much, would be in a whole lot of trouble. I couldn't tell my brother, I couldn't tell anybody. And so the moment that I made that conscious decision, and it was very conscious, to keep my secret inside of me, it was as if I shut the door to my soul spot, locked it up, and threw away the key. It was much too painful to have this feeling here being so strong and what was going on in my mind conflicting with it. This said tell, this said protect. They don't work well together. Something had to go. And so I locked it up. I went through life not being guided by my intuition, not knowing how wonderful I was. I heard it a lot. And so I made sure that growing up I would do all of the things that I thought my family wanted me to do. My mom and dad were great. They said, "Oh, you're so smart. You're so funny. You're so pretty. Look at you. You're so good at sports." And I was that. But not because I felt it, because I saw it in their eyes. When you're going through life and you're feeling that way, or you're not feeling rather, you're looking for cues, sometimes you get misled. And I'm a softie for people that are having a hard time in life. So as a result, I fell in love with a man who was completely and totally abusive. Still keeping that story locked up and my soul spot tucked away tightly, I married this man and was pregnant with my first child, a son. And it was at that time that I realized my grandfather is still alive, and he's still sitting down at the dinner tables with us, and we can't have that happen. So out of a will to protect my child from being anywhere near him, I finally told my immediate family. And I was very well supported. And in telling my immediate family, that door opened up just a little bit. Just enough to start letting that light out. And to say, okay, maybe there's more for you. Maybe you don't need to live this kind of life. Maybe you don't deserve to be abused. Maybe you're smarter than that. Eventually, I followed those signals from my soul spot and I got out of that relationship. But it would be another 20 years before I told anybody else. About a year and a half ago, I met a beautiful friend. And anybody who's been abused and listened to anybody else's story will often know that it's really easy to compare your abuse to somebody else's and to downplay your own. You know, mine wasn't nearly as bad as that. Well, I'm telling you, mine wasn't nearly as bad as that. This poor woman had gone through hell and back and come out a warrior, kicking and screaming all the way, and had not told anybody. She'd been in therapy for years, literally years, trying so hard to get rid of the flashbacks and the anxiety that came along with, as a result from her abuse. And she shared with her therapist just a little tiny bit of the story, just enough to, like, you know, well, just can't you fix me, right? But she was still holding everything else inside. And over the last, I guess, year and a half or so that we've been together and visiting, we start to trust each other, start to share a bit of our stories and relate to each other. And she would drop one more hint every time I saw her, one more thing that would say, well, this is happening to me. And I accepted it. I didn't freak out. I was thrilled for her to actually say it out loud. And as she started to share more and more, she got to a point where she thought maybe she needed to tell her therapist the story. And then that's when something really, well, it was kind of cool from the outside. I'm sure she wasn't too happy with it. But she'd come over after having been unable to speak for 3 entire days. I mean, she couldn't make a sound. She would laugh and it would look like this. There wasn't a sound coming out. And I honestly believe, and while she was texting me, I was sharing my thoughts with her too. I honestly believe that her subconscious was protecting her from sharing that story. And as soon as she started feeling threatened that that story is going to be out, it won't be able to stop, it shut her down. And then I realized that this can shut you down, but this won't let you. So she needed to open that. And I shared with her how when I first shared my story with my family, that's when life started to turn around. That's when I started to heal. And then I realized that if she was to share her story, the same thing could happen for her. And she looked at me after not speaking for 3 days and she said, and she was always so anxious, but she looked at me and she said, yeah, maybe. And I'm like, what did you say? You're speaking. Anyhow, so the neatest thing about it was that I could sit and I'd watch her after and she was completely at peace. Almost resigned to the fact that, yes, I need to connect to that. Maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I didn't deserve that. And maybe I can take the next step to getting help for myself through my therapist. And I thought that was phenomenal. In 2013, on May 23rd, I attended a walk in Ottawa for victims, adult victims, or any victims of childhood sexual abuse. And it was there, and leading right up to it, that I actually, for the first time publicly said, I was sexually abused as a child. And my world didn't fall apart. In fact, it kept getting better and better and better. So while I was at that walk, and there's hundreds of people, and most of us didn't know each other prior to going there. We had no idea who it was, but the bonds that were shared there were absolutely incredible. As people started to finally find courage, knowing that they were surrounded by people who had also experienced similar things, wow, that was powerful. It's almost like you could just see the shame drop and people ripping it off and saying, I'm done. And that's where my book, Shredding the Shame, the title came from, because it literally was a shredding of the shame that we had felt. In fact, I didn't even know I felt that much shame until I attended that walk. I sat and I watched. There was an older couple there, and they had not seen each other in 50 years, but as children, they had lived right next door to each other and had both been sexually abused. Neither one of them knowing that their neighbor right next door, their friend, was also suffering similar fate. And those two people, they stood there the entire time. Didn't matter what anybody else was doing, that whole world just melted away around them. And they held each other's hands and looked into each other's eyes. And I thought, wow, that's something. I was lost watching them being lost. And you know, the most powerful thing about that was that we were all connected. We were connected in our stories. And I believe that part of the magic that happens when you share a story is that you connect. It doesn't matter whether the abuse is the same. It doesn't matter whether your difficulty is the same. It doesn't matter whether you're dyslexic or you have ADHD or you've been abused. It does not matter. It's your story. And your story isn't given to you just to be your story. It's given to you so that you can share it and connect with somebody else who is suffering. You know, in a world that is so completely full of people longing for connection, you look on the internet and the social media sites and everybody is just obsessively looking at their phones and trying to connect and not connecting. And all we really need to do is share our story. Maya Angelou was right. There is absolutely no greater burden than bearing an untold story inside of you. So maybe when you leave here tonight, you'll go find that trusted friend and you'll share your story with them and feel the relief from the burden of its weight.